Hello, and welcome to a special Up Close on METV. I'm Charles Clapsaddle, Station Manager for Manatee Educational Television. And on this edition of Up Close, we're going to do a special legislative update with newly elected Congressman Vern Buchanan. I should say not newly elected, now you're a four-term U.S. Congressman.
Charles, good seeing you again.
Congressman, thank you so much for coming and joining us again. These updates that you have given to the population of Sarasota and Manatee County are invaluable. Newly elected, four-term, it's got to be a great thrill for you to be reelected and back in Congress.
Well, I'm humbled. Being a blue-collar kid, I tell people I'm humbled to be a congressman, but at the end of the day, I'm a representative, and that's why I do a lot of town halls. I was just here in Bradenton, and I spent an hour and a half, 2 hours with folks here because I remember when I first ran for Congress, because I've been in business for myself for 30 years, everybody would always say, Washington is not listening, and I try to do everything I can in terms of outreach to get input so I can better represent people in Washington.
Well, Congressman, one of the very first things that you did as you were reelected was the first bill that you ever introduced was the Buchanan Balanced Budget Amendment. And you've resubmitted this. Can you tell us why, first of all, why this is important and what do you think is going to happen with this bill?
Well, it's my biggest interest in terms of all this. I mean, when I look at, there's a lot of issues in Washington, but by far the biggest issue is the Balanced Budget Amendment. And that's why I introduced that the first week I ran. I just think simply you can't spend more than you take in. We're $16.5 trillion in debt. We're picking up $1.3 trillion deficits each year. At some point it implodes. 49 out of 50 governors have to balance their budget. In terms of Tallahassee, they can get nothing done, but they've got to have a budget that balances before they leave Tallahassee in that period of 2 months. And we need to do the same thing up there, because what we're doing is we're passing on that debt to our children and grandchildren. It's immoral. So I just think whatever the taxpayers send us, give them the best value for the money, and that should be our focus and our thrust up there. And the only way I think we can do that was with a constitutional balanced budget amendment. So I'm going to continue to fight. We did get a vote up a couple of years ago, but we're going to try to get it up again this year.
Well, come back as the year progresses and let us know the status on that and what efforts have to be made on your behalf and the leadership's behalf to see how that's going to go through. But as we talk about Congress and the things that are happening, legislation has recently been passed that prevents members of Congress from getting paid if they fail to pass a budget. Yeah. So how long has it been since Congress had a budget and passed one?
We passed it in the House, but the Senate hasn't passed one in 4 years. And we sent a bill over the other day that they're not going to get paid because we control the purse strings in the House unless they pass a budget. It's fundamental, it's basic. Families have them, they have to live within them. Small businesses have had to make a lot of tough adjustments the last 3 or 4 years, but they all have budgets. We run the largest enterprise in the world, and to think we don't have a budget that everybody agrees to makes absolutely no sense. So again, I think it's a good program, good bill. Just says simply, if you don't produce a budget, a basic part of your job, probably the most key thing about your job, then we're not going to pay you as taxpayers.
Well, I'm sure that can motivate a few congressmen up there to kind of seriously think about what their responsibilities are. But let's stay on that issue for a moment if we can. This year, you voted for the bill to avoid the fiscal cliff, which was critical. It was in the news, almost daily emphasis about the fiscal cliff. What is that fiscal cliff, and what is this bill intended to do, and what's next on the horizon?
Well, again, we had a couple options. The option is to have everybody's taxes go up 100%, or just to have 1 or 2% of the taxes go up, and 95% of the taxes not go up. And I voted for it. It's kind of like you're in a boat, you go overboard, you got 100 people drowning, you let them all drown, or do you save 98, 99% of the folks? I think that was the right thing to do. I don't like to see taxes go up on anybody because that affects small business and jobs. But at the end of the day, I didn't have that option. I had an option either let everybody's taxes go up or save 99%. It was the right thing to do. I mentioned to some of my business people, friends of mine that weren't necessarily happy with the vote. I said, look, these are your employees, these are your customers. Their taxes were going to go up another 4 or 5%. They had a payroll tax that did go up on everybody 2%. So to add 2% plus another 4 or 5% is the wrong thing. Our economy is getting better, but it's still fragile. I'm bullish long term on Manatee County, and I think I see things where things are getting better, but it's not where it needs to be.
Well, and that's a good point, which leads me to our next question. There's still some tough decisions ahead, and one of those is impending sequestration. First of all, tell us what sequestration means for our audiences, and what these effects are going to mean if they go into place.
Well, basically, it was the president's idea, sequestration, is to have substantial cuts. It's about $1.2 trillion over 10 years if they don't come up with spending cuts.
Right.
And so the bottom line is that got pushed off. It didn't get dealt with by the end of the year. The president, in terms, got his tax increases on the top people making over $450. So part of that is we wanted to make sure there was proper and adequate cuts. That comes up March 1st. I think it should be more targeted, but it's basically going to cut into defense spending about 4 or 5%, and then what we call discretionary spending, not Medicare, Social Security, or veterans benefits, discretionary spending 4 or 5%. And if nothing gets done with that, that's just those cuts will go in place. Now we're running $1.3 trillion deficits. We need some cuts.
Right.
Most people think that we don't have a tax problem, we've got a spending problem. I agree with that. When I got there in 2007, we were spending about 2.6 trillion, running a 1.3. We're running a $130 billion deficit. Today, in the last 4 years, we've took the spending up 3.7, and we're running $1.3 trillion deficits. So we've increased spending 30%, where most people, businesses and families, have cut spending. We've increased it, and so we do need the cuts.
And do you anticipate this going into effect in March?
Well, I hope we can get more targeted, more strategic cuts, but I think the mindset, I can just tell you with a lot of people, they're Democrats and Republicans, but I think those cuts are going to go in place.
Well, Congressman, one of the key things that you've been very dedicated to since your beginning term in Congress is the economy and jobs. What can we do as a community, as a region, as a country to get people working again in this area, in this region?
Well, it wasn't something I was asking to do, but I got selected or nominated as the chairman of the Florida delegation. We have the third largest delegation in the country, 29 members of Congress. I'll hold my first meeting this week, Wednesday, Valentine's Day, in fact, and we're going to talk about ports and trade. And Port Manatee will be there. It's a huge opportunity. Our ports, we have 15 ports, Port Manatee being one of them. But we do, I think, $68 to $70 billion in economic activity. We have 20,000 jobs with the port directly and indirectly. We'd like to double that in Manatee County because it's got very good paying jobs. It's probably 50% more than any of the other traditional jobs in the area. So one of the things we can do is to focus clearly on help our port be more successful. We have the land, we have the opportunity, and we have the desire. I think the Manatee County Commission are very focused on that. So that would add the economic diversity and good paying jobs, and that's what we clearly have to do.
Well, with the new port director, Carlos Buqueras, at the helm, he has a lot of new and innovative ideas, especially talking about the advent of increased trade with the Panama Canal in the next few years. So it can be a great economic multiplier for this entire area.
Well, I'm excited about Carlos. He brings some vast experience. He's from the other side of Florida, and I think Fort Lauderdale area, but he does have a lot of background, speaks Spanish, and when you look at the Panama Canal, South America, Central America, those are great opportunities. We are the closest port to the Panama Canal. So there's a lot more business, a lot more opportunity. I had the ambassador here once or twice at Port Manatee. We want to get more of that business, and I'm going to be clearly focused on that. I'm actually the chairman of the Panama Caucus, and just trying to make sure we build those relationships so as those opportunities come up, we take advantage of it.
And a lot of times, when these plans are made, you have to think long term in the development. You have to kind of lay the groundwork so when the Panama Canal, the widening of the Panama Canal comes online, all of those preparations are already underway. Those agreements are already signed. So Port Manatee and other ports, perhaps throughout Florida, are a good place to capitalize on those new opportunities.
I think we've already picked up some additional business for the port. We are looking at the Port Connector Road. We want to make sure we have rail service, better rail service. So we are putting a lot of the pieces in place. I think we've got a pretty good plan going forward, but I'd like to see it accelerate even more. Maybe look at a public-private partnership, which I think would really help. But again, historically, Manatee County, Sarasota County, they're about tourism and construction, right, home building. We need that third leg, would be huge in terms of economic diversity, because I think we can pick up 20 to 30,000 good paying jobs. So I'm going to do everything I can. And in fact, I think Carlos is going to be up there that runs the port this Wednesday, so I'm looking forward to see him. But I'm going to be asking my colleagues in Congress, what can we do more to help them, and hopefully we'll make that, we'll emphasize our energy based on the discussions we get from our people that are running the ports in Florida.
And if you'd ever like to have the opportunity to come on METV and sit down with Mr. Picaris and talk about some of the opportunities, we'd welcome that opportunity. I think that'd be a great program, the two of you talking about the port and ports in general as an economic multiplier in this area. Congressman, one of the things for your constituency, and has been, since you were first elected to office, is that you have one of the oldest populations in the nation. Tell us a little bit your thoughts about Medicare and Social Security and the critical nature of this.
Well, we do have one of the older demographics. I kid people sometimes, and I'm getting up there myself. 60 years or so. So I love living in the area because sometimes I'll go in the drugstore and they'll say, "Is there anything else you need, son?" So I kind of like that. But let me just say, I'm on the Ways and Means Committee. In fact, I'm the only member in Florida on the Ways and Means Committee. We have jurisdiction over Medicare and Social Security. We have a very broad jurisdiction. So I'm going to do everything we can. Those are important programs. Seniors count on those programs. I would say, good or bad, probably 60, 70% of seniors, when they get to be 65, 70, that's their main assets. They've paid into Social Security for a lot of years. They're counting on Medicare. So I want to make sure they're viable going forward. So we've got to make sure we protect them. And then also in terms, we have a lot of retired veterans here. I think 90-some thousand veterans in the two counties. And I want to make sure what the benefits they've earned in terms of health care, in terms of pensions, that they're available for them as well. Because I served on the VA for 4 years. So again, those programs are very important to our seniors locally. For many of our seniors, it's the only assets they have, and we want to make sure they're secure long term. So that's something I'm going to clearly weigh in a big way, because we're disproportionately affected, not only in this area, but across the state of Florida, more than any other state, I think, in the country. So we've got to make sure that they stay strong programs long term.
And we want to talk a little more later about your efforts on behalf of veterans as well. But as a member, and you've mentioned it, as the House Ways and Means Committee, you and that committee has jurisdiction over tax policy. The committee has been working on tax reform. What's the status of it, and why do we need tax reform now? Well,
tax reform hasn't been dealt with since 1986. We've got, I think, 73,000 pages, especially as you look at small businesses and what they've got to deal with, the complexity of taxes. We want to get as much input as we can. We've had probably, I'd say, 50, 60 hearings from individuals and small businesses and people that do business abroad. And we want to find a way that we can make it simpler, maybe a flatter, fair tax, eliminate some of the loopholes so it's revenue neutral. But we think we can be a lot more efficient to compete not just here locally, but help our companies that do business abroad. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. And, I was just in China. You see in that region, Hong Kong used to be 20%. They just lowered it to 15. I asked them, I said, 20% seems more unfair. They said, well, we have to be more competitive. So we got to think of ourselves. 95% of the marketplace in the global economy is outside Florida. Even President Obama mentioned he wanted to double exports. So we've got to make sure tax policy affects all these different opportunities that we have. And you think about, we haven't dealt with taxes since in a material way since '86. That's a lot of years. So we have to figure out a way to keep it flatter, fair, and simpler for our small business people and for individuals as well.
Well, again, as you go through this session and everything, if you'd like to come back and give an update, because I'm sure that's going to become right in the forefront throughout this legislative, is the tax reform.
Yeah, in fact, I'm meeting with 3 people today in my office, and they were telling me that they'd like to have a town hall on tax reform. And I said, when do you want to do it? Because at the end of the day, that's really critically important. I tell people I'm humbled to be a congressman as a blue-collar kid, but at the end of the day, I'm a representative, and that's why I do as many town halls as I can to get the input in terms of tax reform and other things, because some people have a very strong thought about that, flat tax or a fair tax, or trying to look at the tax system we have and make it fair. So, I'm open-minded, but we want to make sure when we get done, it's a product that we're all proud of.
And also on the front burners here is the issue of immigration. Immigration has come up through the president. Senator Rubio has presented a plan. What's coming up with immigration reform, and what do you see on the horizon between the president and other plans that are going to be coming forward?
I think we're going to get something done on immigration. I'm against amnesty. I just don't think people that break the law should get citizenship. I do think you got to take a look at Florida in terms of, I think we spend $1.4 billion for illegals, and that money needs to go to Americans. I think we need to make sure English is the official language. But if we can get no amnesty, make sure we secure our borders, and we've done, we've done a fair job, but there's a lot more work to do. Make English the official language and find a way to make this work. I think it makes some sense. We do have 12 or 14 million people here illegally. They're in the shadows and other places, but we need to find a way to make it work, and we need a policy. We need immigration reform. There's no question about it. So I'm going to look at what Marco Rubio comes up with, the senator, and others, and take a look at it. But again, I'm against amnesty, and I want to make sure English is the official language.
Well, Congressman, again, another thing that we'll welcome you back to update, because I think that's going to be really one of the hot topic things as you move into session.
And by the way, that something's going to happen on that, I think, in the next 6 months. I don't think it was there the last couple of years, but it is now.
Staying on the sort of the same topic, we were talking about world affairs. Recently, you sponsored legislation to stop sending foreign aid to Egypt. Egypt gone through the turmoil of the Arab Spring, and then now they're ingrained with the Arab Muslim Brotherhood. Tell us a little bit about what's prompted you to sponsor that legislation.
Well, they haven't been our friend. I mean, I don't know why we think we got to send jets to the Muslim Brotherhood. We're giving them $2 billion a year. We've given them that for them for 20 years. But they haven't been very good to us. They haven't been very good to our friends in Israel. So I just say, why do we want to, especially with our budget and our deficits that we're running, why are we interested in giving them additional $2 billion each year? And I just think we need to cut it off. And people that are supportive of what we're trying to do, maybe we try to find a way to help them. But at the end of the day, we need to take care of Americans first. With those dollars, we're having to borrow those from the Chinese or the Japanese. We borrow them, and then we give them to Egypt. let Egypt go to China and get the money direct. I don't think it's something that we need to be doing. And so I've taken a pretty strong stance on that no funding to Egypt, especially when you think about it in terms of $2 billion.
And that's huge, and that's an ongoing thing per year. So it's a
per
huge
year.
amount of money.
Yeah.
It's a huge amount of money. As you mentioned at the very beginning of the program, you were recently elected to the chair of the Florida delegation. Tell us a little bit about what that's going to mean, for Florida as you as the chair, and how and what kind of impact that Florida delegation can make on pending legislation.
Well, I'm humbled to have the opportunity, but Florida is the third largest state. We have one Democratic senator, one Republican senator. I think we have 17 Republicans and 10 Democrats. I hosted a little event the other night, the Florida House up in D.C., and I just said, look, we're all Americans. We've got to find ways we can work together. Let's find 80% of the things we can agree on. Doesn't appear that way in Washington, but I want to run a bipartisan effort in terms of leadership and have people work together and find common bond on a lot of issues. We had a very good turnout. We had Senator Bill Nelson there. We had Debbie Wasserman there. So our first event that I'll be chairing will be this Wednesday, Valentine's Day, and we're going to be talking about ports and trade. Now, that's something that's not Democrat or Republican.
Correct.
That means to me we're going to create more jobs and more opportunities and more spin-offs in terms of small business opportunities for entrepreneurs. And it's an area we can really grow in terms of that. We'll look at, ideally, the Everglades. So maybe we'll have something, we'll come in and talk about small business issues. Look at ag in terms, we have a lot of tomato growers in this area, one of the largest counties for tomato growing in the country. So we'll look at a lot of different subjects that the Democrats and Republicans, things that we can both work on.
Right.
But I think what I hear in my town halls is they hate the idea of the partisanship on both sides. Hey, we're sending you guys up there to get the job done. Start passing a budget, start dealing with these difficult issues, and start getting some results. We're paying you for results, but we're not getting them. So I'm going to do what I can from a leadership standpoint in terms of chairing the Florida delegation on a bipartisan basis to do more for Florida and do more for Manatee County.
Well, Congressman, it's a much-needed effort because there's always been that partisanship going on, and for the last 4 years. So hopefully, with the kind of leadership that you can provide, and that kind of sense of inclusion, the Florida delegation can set an example, perhaps for the rest.
Well,
of the
again,
country.
like you said, we're the third largest delegation. You got California #1, Texas #2. We just got tied with Florida. Next year, we're going to go. We just got tied with New York. We both have 29 members, and next year we'll pass them up in population. So we're the third largest state, and we should have more clout, but the only way we have the clout is we've got to come together for the best interest of Florida and Manatee County.
Well, and hopefully under your stewardship, you can see that achieved. Now, Congressman, you were mentioning, we were talking about Social Security and Medicare and the efforts that you've done on behalf of veterans. During your 4 terms, or 3 previous terms, you've dedicated a lot of time and a lot of effort on veterans issues. You were there at the dedication of the new Sarasota Memorial Cemetery. You've had veteran town halls. You've done an awful lot on behalf of veterans and their families. But recently, and this is a very important thing for Manatee and Sarasota County, you attended the groundbreaking on the Patterson Foundation's new Patriots Plaza as part of the cemetery. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what's your involvement and why is that important for this area? Well,
the National Cemetery is world class. We have 90-some thousand veterans in the area I serve, but it serves a 75-mile radius. So we have 400,000 veterans and their family, and it's very important to them. So it's a world-class facility. If people have a chance, they need to go out and see it. But then we have a local foundation that they were involved and wanted to do something for the veterans. They're giving us, I think it's $6 million roughly, that is going to build a world-class pavilion for Memorial Day events and Veteran Day type of events to celebrate and recognize the sacrifices that our veterans have made for our freedoms. And they're going to provide, so there's no money to the taxpayers to build it. Then they're going to put together a little foundation that'll pay for the ongoing maintenance. So we've got an incredible 300-acre national cemetery, probably good for 50 years. And then we're going to build a pavilion out there that people can be very proud of. It was a way of recognizing our veterans, because at the end of the day, we wouldn't have our freedoms. There's been a lot of sacrifices made. And I know in my case, I lost an uncle in World War II. My wife, we've been together 40 years. She lost an uncle in World War II. So a lot of them have paid the ultimate sacrifice. But we want to make sure that we do this in a big way, in a first-class way. And I think this will be something that will spread across the country, because we have a lot of great national cemeteries, and it's outstanding to have the opportunity of the cemetery here that will service Manatee and Sarasota counties.
Well, the Patterson Foundation is one of the most well thought of and very generous foundations in this entire area. And under the leadership of Deborah Jacobs and with the cooperation of members like yourself, this has a great opportunity, to really be a highlight, not only for this area, but for the nation. I've
known Deborah for 10, 15 years, the last 15 years. She's an incredible lady. When she does things, she does it in a very high quality way. This will be done, like I said, world class, first class, however you want to look at it. And we went to the groundbreaking the other day, so they're well on their way. I think they've got the plans done, the planning, the VA is signed off, and I'm very excited to be able to go in there and in the very near future and be involved in an event. But again, it's about supporting our veterans, recognizing their sacrifices, and we want to make sure we do everything that turns out the way we expect it to.
Well, Congressman, as we wind down here, again, we want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to participate. What is the challenges, the biggest challenge that you see coming up in this upcoming session? What is that one thing that you're looking forward to tackling?
Well, this is what I'm going to be doing Wednesday. I tell people, a lot of them are the Republicans and Democrats. We're all Americans. I just got back from China and Asia. I do the trade component, so I'm over there fighting for jobs in our companies over there so we can get more jobs back home. But at the end of the day, we've got to come together on a bipartisan basis. And, we're not, they might have issues that are critical to them and us, but 80% small business and jobs and the debt and deficit, those are things that we can agree to. So we need to go up, and hopefully I can provide some of that leadership to work together to get some of these difficult issues addressed. They can be addressed, there's no question about it, but it gets to be so partisan and so dysfunctional. And I'm trying to say, look, we're all Americans. Let's make our voters, our constituents proud. Let's start addressing some of these issues, and let's address them now.
Congressman, we're going to welcome you back to come and update this community, Sarasota and Manatee, on some of these issues that you talked about today. Your efforts on behalf of veterans and the constituency throughout both of the counties is to be applauded. And we welcome you back at any time.
Well, Charles, I appreciate the opportunity, and I'd only tell your listeners, make sure that they stay involved and stay connected. Go to buchanan.house.gov, give me your thoughts and your ideas, because at the end of the day, as I said earlier on the show, I'm a representative. I can represent them better if they give me their feedback and their ideas. But thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Congressman. And thank you for joining us on this special legislative update edition of Up Close on METV. I'm Charles Clapsaddle. We'll see you next time.